We had been pushing towards Munich when Dachau was liberated. General Collins sent word that any man who wanted to see why we were fighting should go over. The next morning we were loaded into trucks for the trip. It was the most horrible thing I've seen. Bodies were stacked in rail cars. We were warned not to feed any survivors. Doctors would do that. Those were the words of Gerald O. Eaton, one of the first men who arrived inside of Dachau to see the horrors for himself. Dachau was the oldest concentration camp and the first opened as the Third Reich rose to power, and the scenes that greeted the US forces on the 29th of April 1945 scarred them for the rest of their lives. Many were unable to sleep for days after they saw what evil the SS guards had inflicted upon innocent people. Around the camp lay thousands of corpses, some skeletal, and some very fresh, as prisoners had died hours before the American troops entered the complex. But amongst the terror, there were a number of barbaric guards who were found, as well as capos, those prisoners who were ordered to wield power over other inmates. But the Americans did not cleanly take over Dachau. There were a number of guards who were slaughtered in reprisal, vengeance killings, for the terror found around the site. But why did the American soldiers shoot Dachau's guards? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Now, to begin with, one thing to consider is that the American guards did not know how hostile the guards inside the camp would have been to them. They did not necessarily know if many were armed and whether they would shoot at them. They were dealing with SS personnel, the most virulent and ardent Nazis of them all, who would happily carry out torture and much worse crimes, all for the Reich. It was on the 29th of April 1945 that scouts from the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion found a satellite camp, and then shortly after, Lieutenant Colonel Felix L. Sparks' 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Infantry Division, approached a large, sprawling Dachau site. On the way they found 39 large railway boxcars, which were all stuffed with corpses, many of them as mentioned skeletal, these people having become victims of the camp and the guards. When the US forces saw the site and smelt the odours coming from these boxcars, many were instantly sick, and tears began to fall from their eyes, not being able to comprehend how humans could be so evil towards each other. Many others also built up a huge rage and hatred for their enemy, and the perpetrators of these crimes, the guards of Dachau. This hatred bubbled over into a search for vengeance and for getting their own back on the people who had caused such terror. The Americans wanted to inflict some punishment to those who had done this, but more terrible scenes would come as they entered Dachau. The camp had begun to be evacuated days before, and one man left to surrender the camp was SS Untersturmführer Heinrich Wicker. He had roughly 560 personnel, guards with him, many still much hostile to the Allied forces and very much pro-Nazi. The camp was officially surrendered on the 29th of April 1945 to Brigadier General Henning Linden of the 42nd Infantry Division, and he was taken on a tour of the camp. He later wrote, "As we approached the southwest corner, 3 people came forward with a flag of truce. We met them about 75 yards north of the southwest corner. These 3 people were a Swiss Red Cross representative, Victor Maurer, and 2 SS troopers, who said they were the camp commander and his assistant. They had come here on the night of the 28th to take over from the regular camp personnel, for the purpose of surrendering the camp to the advancing Americans." The Swiss Red Cross representative said there were around 100 SS guards in the camp, who had their arms stacked, except for the people in the tower. He had given instruction that there would be no shots fired, and it would take about 50 men to relieve the guards, as there were 42,000 half-crazed inmates, many of them typhus infected. He asked if I were an officer. I replied, "I am the Assistant Division Commander of the 42nd Infantry Division, and will accept the surrender of this camp in the name of the Rainbow Division for the United States Army." Now the anger had been building amongst the American forces, and let's remember that Heinrich Wicker, the man in charge of Dachau at the time, had over 500 men who were at his disposal. The US forces did not necessarily know if they would have a battle around the camp against the German forces, and there would be gunshots fired around Dachau and within the barbed wire fences. Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, would later state about the liberation of the camp that our forces liberated and mopped up the infamous concentration camp at Dachau. Approximately 32,000 prisoners were liberated, but 300 SS camp guards were quickly neutralised. With this, he claimed that 300 guards who had been based around the camp were shot and defeated by American soldiers. Some of these were vengeance killings, and they would include a liberation massacre, which we'll come to shortly. But there were pockets of fighting all around the camp. The US forces had been informed that they may face armed resistance, and in particular fighting from the guards. One historian claimed about the liberation that, at noon on Sunday, the camp was quiet and the SS guards were at their posts in the towers when the cry "Americans" went up. A prisoner rushed towards the gate and the guards shot him. Outside, a single American soldier stood looking casually at the towers whilst the guards eyed him and others who were 200 or 300 yards away. When the Americans opened fire, the guards in the gate tower came down, hands in the air. One held a pistol behind his back and the first American shot him. The situation in Dachau was very tense. According to accounts on the ground at the time, some of the Nazis were rounded up and summarily executed, along with the guard dogs, by US forces. Another historian later claimed that 16 men were shot in the coalyard, 17 were shot at Tower B, a few more were killed around there, and that more than 50 guards were killed by the inmates. But the incident in the coalyard has been written into history as a rather dark part of the liberation. One thing to consider is that those German SS guards, no matter what their ideologies were at the time politically, or what they thought of the inmates, if they had given themselves over and surrendered, and were unarmed, then like it or not, then they were considered prisoners of war, and thus should have been spared their lives and processed through the correct channels. Now a group had been gathered in a courtyard, and these were stood in a confined area that was sealed off by a wall. There were roughly 50 German prisoners in this area, and the Germans were being watched over by a machine gun team from I Company. But at some point the machine gun was turned on the German POWs. They were unarmed and were of little threat. The account from Sparks, the man in charge, claimed that as he left the area, a soldier shouted, "They're trying to get away," and then machine gun fire was heard. Sparks ran back over and found a 19-year-old soldier manning the gun, and he kicked him off this, and he then found 12 dead SS guards, and many more were screaming in pain. The gunner himself was crying, and he claimed that the POWs were trying to escape. Sparks later recounted of this incident that it was the foregoing incident which has given rise to wild claims in various publications that most or all of the German prisoners captured at Dachau were executed. Nothing could be further from the truth. The total number of German guards killed at Dachau during that day most certainly did not exceed 50, with 30 probably being a more accurate figure. The regimental records for that date indicate that over 1,000 German prisoners were brought to the regimental collecting point. Since my task force was leading the regimental attack, almost all the prisoners were taken by the task force, including several hundred from Dachau. Now, this incident is rather straightforward to explain. The inexperienced NCO who was placed on the gun did not know what to do when some SS guards made a run for it, and he just opened up his weapon. He may have had insufficient manpower around him to also detain those, and the place that the guards were being herded into was probably not the most suitable, and without prior knowledge of the different parts of Dachau, the Americans put the guards in an open area, expecting them just to not run off. But maybe one of the most serious questions about this is one involving vengeance, and what the Americans may have thought before the shooting began. It's probable that this may have been in the minds of those during the incident, and also in the killings that occurred around Dachau, that they wanted some form of revenge. Also inside of Dachau, the American guards did not stop a number of prisoners attacking and killing their former guards themselves. It was claimed that prisoners caught the SS men. The first SS man elbowed 1 or 2 prisoners out of the way, but the courage of the prisoner mounted. They knocked them down, and nobody could see whether they were stomped or what, but they were killed. Those prisoners who had been given some power, known as capos, were also killed, and the US forces did turn a blind eye to what was happening, believing that these killings were most probably justified, especially considering all the corpses around Dachau and inside of the boxcars. Another incident took place near to the back entrance of the camp. Commander of I Company, incidentally the man who was in control of the very soldier who turned the machine gun on the other guards, Lieutenant William Walsh, shot 4 Germans who had surrendered in a boxcar, and then a private gave them a coup de grace gunshot to the head, finishing them off. Some SS guards were also separated from inmates, and they were then taken to a separate part of the camp and were shot. In total, taking Eisenhower's estimates as the most likely and valid at the time, he claimed that around 300 SS guards were neutralised and shot. Some of these were shot in skirmishes around Dachau, and many more were shot in reprisal, with vengeance being most probably on the minds of those who were inside of Dachau. A judge later claimed that there had probably been a violation of the laws and rules of war, but did say that, in the light of the conditions which greeted the eyes of the first combat troops, it is not believed that justice or equity demand that the difficult and perhaps impossible task of fixing individual responsibility now be undertaken. With this he gave some justification to the killings, claiming that they were in a sense understandable due to the terror inside the camp that was found by the American liberators. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.